He didn't even recognize himself in the mirror anymore, not because he looked different, but because he couldn't feel anything. He had the job, he had the body, he had the women. But every night, he lay awake in the quiet ache of something missing. Not sadness, not depression, something more subtle, more insidious, a hollow space where fire used to live. And the worst part, no one around him noticed, because from the outside he looked fine, productive, polished. But inside his instincts were numb, his gaze dulled, his energy scattered. And deep down, he knew. It wasn't the world that had tamed him. He had tamed himself. He remembered the last time he gave in, not with panic, but with that hollow kind of relief, the kind that feels like taking a deep breath underwater. The screen went black, and the silence returned. That silence didn't shame him, it haunted him. Not because he failed, but because he knew he had traded fire for fog again. This is the silent fate of a man who has lost contact with his own depth, who has traded his edge for approval, his fire for fitting in. Carl Jung called it the abandonment of the shadow, the moment we exile the wild, the instinctive, the dangerous parts of ourselves in order to be accepted. But that disowned self doesn't disappear. It waits. It simmers. And when it's ignored long enough, it starts speaking in anxiety, in compulsions, in the quiet feeling that you've become a stranger in your own skin. And that's where we begin, at the threshold, not of success, not of pleasure, but of wholeness. The kind that doesn't come from adding more, but from reclaiming what was buried, what you repressed, what you've been told to fear. Because somewhere in that darkness is everything you've been searching for. They told you freedom meant doing whatever you feel. That desire should never be questioned, only satisfied. That if it burns inside you, you should pour it out before it consumes you. But no one warned you what happens when you empty yourself too often, how your thoughts grow foggy, your passion fades, and a quiet fatigue sets in like rust on your soul. They called it expression. You called it relief. But something sacred slipped through your fingers each time. Jung didn't call it a sin, he called it a shadow. A part of you buried under layers of obedience and indulgence. The instincts you've disowned don't vanish, they rebel from within. They twist themselves into restlessness, procrastination, compulsions. What you thought was just an urge might be your unconscious screaming to be heard, not for pleasure, but for purpose, not for release, but recognition. They never taught you how to sit with your fire without being burned, how to feel a wave of energy rising in your gut and not chase a screen, a body, a quick hit. But that fire was never meant to be extinguished. It was meant to be forged, directed, contained like a storm inside a lantern, not to destroy, but to illuminate. You were never weak, you were just misled. Something unexpected happens when you stop feeding the cycle. The noise quiets, the distractions lose their grip, and beneath the surface, something ancient stirs. You wake up feeling different, not euphoric, but solid. Your breath slows, your focus sharpens, your presence thickens. You stand taller, not because you forced it, but because something inside you remembered how. The way your eyes start to hold stillness. The way your voice lands heavier in a room. It's not magic, it's memory. The memory of a self you forgot you were allowed to be. And the more you resist the urge to give it away, the more it builds, not into tension, but into clarity. You stop needing permission to move. You stop apologizing for your depth. What once felt like hunger becomes heat, and that heat becomes will, purpose, power. Not the loud kind, but the kind that moves through silence like thunder waiting to strike. You wake up tired, even after sleeping. Your thoughts jump from one thing to the next before you can catch them. Silence feels suffocating. Stillness feels wrong. Not because you're broken, because you've been conditioned. Conditioned to scroll the moment discomfort creeps in, conditioned to chase the next hit of novelty, the next spark of stimulation. But stimulation isn't nourishment, and you're not hungry. You're overstimulated and underfed. Every ping, every flash, every seductive swipe trains your brain to expect something now, not later, not earned, just delivered. And every time you give in, you teach your nervous system that discomfort is danger, that desire is command. Your will doesn't vanish, it frays, thread by thread, impulse by impulse, until there's no space left between feeling and action, just reaction, just noise. When you ignore what festers in the dark, you don't escape it, you become it. You can't grow if you obey every whisper from the shadows. You can't lead if you're always chasing what was meant to be contained. And that's exactly what this system wants. Your energy spent, your attention fractured, your instincts hijacked. Because a man who can't delay pleasure will never find his power. But there's another way. One built not on suppression but on sovereignty. You pause, you resist, you reclaim the space between the trigger and the choice. That space is everything, that space is freedom. And when you stand in it long enough, something shifts. You stop being a consumer of life and you start becoming its author. You've been taught that if you hold back, you're suppressing something natural. That restraint equals shame. That abstinence is a cage. But that's a shallow story told by people who fear their own depth. Holding back is not weakness, it's weaponry. It's the difference between a scattered flame and a focused beam of light, between a wildfire and a forge, between reaction and creation. Containment is misunderstood because most people don't know what to do with silence. They mistake stillness for absence, but silence is where pressure builds, and pressure, when channeled, moves mountains. Your energy isn't meant to spill at every invitation. It's meant to gather, to compress, to concentrate into something unstoppable. You don't cap a volcano to kill it. You guide its force to shape the land. Because when you aim your energy, when you stop letting it drip through every distraction, you become something rare, something magnetic, something sovereign. Not someone who runs from fire, but someone who carries it with purpose. Your body behaves like an untamed horse, bucking against the reins, wild, impatient, resisting the hand that tries to guide it. You feel it in your bones, in your stomach, in the quiet moments when the world pauses and the ache gets loud. Everything inside you says, just give in. Just once. But you don't. You stay with it. And slowly, something strange begins to happen. The static becomes signal. The fog begins to lift. And what once felt like agitation sharpens into awareness. Your breath deepens. Your voice steadies. Your thoughts, once scattered, start moving with weight. There's a stillness in your chest, but it's not emptiness, it's anchoring. The energy that used to run wild now begins to form structure. Not because you're holding it down, but because you're guiding it upward. Jung understood this as the process of individuation, the transformation of raw instinct into conscious will. You're not avoiding your desire, you're facing it, integrating it, using it as a sculptor uses pressure on stone. What aches today becomes clarity tomorrow. The fire that once scorched begins to illuminate. This is how power is forged, not through denial, but through disciplined transmutation. You're not losing freedom, you're gaining form. Every time you hold it in, you don't shrink, you shape. This is how instinct becomes intention. The same surge that once dragged you into compulsive habits now pushes you toward creation, toward discipline, toward the kind of focus that makes hours disappear and silence feels sacred. The libido, Jung said, is the fundamental energy of the psyche, not just sexual, but spiritual, directional. It fuels what you build, who you become, how you show up when no one's watching. When you stop spending it carelessly, you begin to hold creative leverage over your own life. You don't just think, you produce. You don't just want, you act. And what once felt like hunger becomes craftsmanship. That's the shift, from compulsive repetition to conscious creation, from animal impulse to human artistry. The energy never left you, you just stopped handing it away. And now, it's yours again, sharpened, contained, ready to carve a new shape into your story. Desire disguises itself well. It whispers through your skin, pulls your gaze, wraps itself in fantasy. But beneath the surface, it's not just lust, it's language. The body speaks in hunger, but the soul speaks in metaphor. Jung knew this. He understood that every impulse carries a deeper signal, that the craving for another's body is often a projection of a missing inner bond. You don't just want touch, you want integration. You want to feel whole without depending on something external to make you feel complete. But the shadow resists that truth. It wants quick fixes, fast highs, easy exits. It tells you the emptiness will go away if you just feed it one more time. And each time you listen, you reinforce the illusion that what you need is out there waiting to be possessed. But nothing external can fulfill a need that was born inside you. Until you face that darker layer, the part of you that feels hollow, abandoned, forgotten, you will repeat the cycle: crave, consume, collapse. The shadow isn't evil, it's unacknowledged. It grows more dangerous the longer it stays unseen. And when desire rises from that place, it isn't about love or joy, it's about escaping pain. But if you can pause before acting, if you can turn inward and sit with that ache, you'll start to see it differently. Not as a curse, but as a compass. Not something to fear, but something to follow. Because sometimes the thing you're chasing is really just the part of yourself you left behind. The men who shaped history weren't the ones who chased every thrill. They were the ones who knew how to wait, who knew how to sit with fire and not flinch. While the world screamed for attention, they went silent. While others sought release, they built resistance, not from repression, but from alignment, from choosing something higher than impulse. They didn't conquer the world by avoiding desire. They conquered themselves by turning it into fuel. The artist who fasts before painting. The monk who endures solitude to hear his soul. The leader who resists comfort to serve a vision larger than himself. They all share one thing: discipline rooted in meaning. Jung would say they integrated the shadow not by killing it, but by confronting it. They looked directly at the craving and said, "I see you, but you don't command me." And in that moment, power shifted. They became the authority within. Masculine maturity isn't about becoming sterile. It's about becoming sharp. Knowing that every urge carries a cost. Knowing that every yes to distraction is a no to depth. The warrior doesn't fight against desire. He trains with it. He tempers it. He listens to the chaos and finds clarity inside it. And when the time comes to act, he doesn't hesitate. He's already chosen, not because it's easy, because it's necessary, because without discipline, there is no direction. Without sacrifice, there is no sovereignty. There's a quiet strength in the one who doesn't flinch. The man who walks into chaos without craving noise. The one who feels the urge rise and doesn't run from it, just watches it pass. That kind of presence isn't accidental. It's carved through countless moments of choosing stillness when everything begged for escape. It's forged by saying no, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Each refusal to distract becomes a brick, And before you realize it, you've built something unshakable inside you. Jung called this the process of individuation, the unfolding of the true self, layer by layer, away from the masks you were told to wear. When you resist the pull of cheap stimulation, you're not becoming less human. You're becoming more whole. The fragmented pieces you once scattered across screens and sensations begin to return. Your soul starts to recognize itself again. You stop looking outward for your worth. You stop begging for validation. You carry your energy like a quiet flame, guarded, intentional, sacred. You won't need to announce who you've become. Your energy does it for you, not through volume, but through gravity, not through force, but through stillness. You've reclaimed what was always yours, the sacred fire no one else can carry. This was never just about what you do with your body. It's about what you allow your energy to become. Every instinct you once obeyed without question, every habit dressed up as freedom, none of it made you whole. It kept you distracted, contained, fragmented. And now you've stepped beyond the illusion. You've started to feel the cost of unconscious living, the weight of choices made on autopilot. And that's where the real work begins. The world won't notice when you start saying no. It won't applaud when you stop reaching for the quick fix. But that silence, that absence of recognition, it's the gateway to something unshakable. True transformation never begins in applause. It begins in solitude. It begins when you choose clarity over comfort, power over pleasure, depth over distraction. And every time you do, something in you realigns with itself. Every time that pulse rises when your body tightens, your thoughts flicker, and everything inside you screams for release, you're standing at the threshold. That moment is not punishment, it's potential, it's your test, and how you respond tells you everything about who you're becoming. If you pause, if you stay present, if you dare to hold the gaze of your own shadow, you'll find that the craving isn't asking to be fed, it's asking to be understood. The unconscious doesn't need you to numb it, it needs you to notice it. Jung warned us, what we do not make conscious will rule our lives, and we'll call it fate. But fate can be rewritten by fire that's been owned, by instinct that's been harnessed. And that's the real work. Not resisting desire out of guilt, but transforming it into direction, into vision, into something sacred that can't be sold, seduced, or scattered. There are no shortcuts through this, just the quiet choice to hold when everything begs you to break. And if you've made it here, if something in your chest stirred, you're already part of the few. You're already walking with the flame. So when the world pulls at you again, stop. Breathe, ask, will this empty me or awaken me? You didn't find this message by accident. The part of you that's still alive, that refuses to numb itself, is why you're here. If that fire is still burning, don't walk away from it now. Let it guide you. Leave a comment below. Contain the fire. Command the self. That's how I'll know you're not just watching. You're walking. And if you're ready to keep rising, the next video is waiting. It's yours now. Thank you for being a part of Mosaic Mind.